The age-old question, should you buy it or build it? Today we're talking about stills and whether you should buy them or build them. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. Today we're talking about stills and whether or not you should buy them or build them. To be honest, this is going to be one of those things where I'm going to end up sounding a little bit like Yoda in that I can't tell you what you should do. This is something that you're going to have to work out yourself. But what I can do is point out a bunch of different pros and cons on both sides of the fence and let you sort of figure out which ones are a pro for you and which ones are a con for you. Because let's face it, with a topic like this, it kind of depends on your specific situation. And distilling is one of those things, one of those hobbies where it's super personal, man. It's really, really personal. So for those of you out there that just think everyone should build their own still, come on, guys. You've just got to understand that some people aren't in a position to do that. But in saying that, if you think that I miss a certain pro or con for either buying or building a still, you know what to do. Comment section down below. Let's move over in front of the still that I actually built for this part, shall we? Oh, there we go. The number one reason that you should build your own still is that it's cheaper. Or is it? This is why making this video is so difficult, because every single thing that I go to say is so dependent on you. So dependent on where you live, on the skills you have, on the tools you have, on the interests you have, what you enjoy doing, why you enjoy doing it. So yeah, it can be cheaper to make your own still for sure. But do you have access to good materials? Do you have access to cheap materials? Do you have access to a good supply of secondhand materials? Do you have, for example, a really good secondhand store close by that's got a plethora of copper pipings and tubings and stainless vessels and all those sort of things? Do you have stainless steel 50-litre kegs available in your area, or have all of the homebrewers snaffled them up and it's dry, you can't get them anymore? I can't answer that for you. But in my mind, this is probably one of the first things you're going to want to look into when building your own still. But let's just say that's a positive. You can build it for cheaper than you can buy it because you're not going to pay yourself time. Although, depending on how you look at it, maybe you do want to pay yourself time. See the video that I made talking about some of these things up here and the discussion that went along with it. The second pro to building your own still, and probably this is the one that's really, really a big thing for me, is that it's more customizable. But once again, this comes down to, what are your skills like? What are your metalworking skills like? What are your soldering skills like? What are your welding skills like? Can you actually physically make something that is more customizable than what you can buy from the store? And of course, you could just go out there and buy a completely custom made still, commission one, get one made with exactly the specs you want, or find a local, tradesman to build it for you. Once again, it's tricky, guys, but I kind of feel like every one of these points, you as the viewer, you as the person who's in this situation, is going to kind of have a gut feeling about this. Some people are just really confident with learning new skills and building new skills, and they're not worried about spending money on tools, because once you buy them, you have them, and then they're valuable to you. You can use them in other situations. That's how some people think. If you're one of those people, this is a big pro for you. Building your own still, big pro. If, however, you kind of have an allergic reaction to the idea of having to go out and buy a whole bunch of tools for a new project, maybe it's not for you, unless, of course, you've already got them. There's another part of this that is really, really dependent on the type of personality you have. Some people just love the geekery and the challenge of having to research stuff, of having to really learn a whole lot of different things, of gathering and collecting skills to put towards a project. If you're the sort of person that loves an excuse to do that, building a still is 100% for you, because there is so much geekery and so much research to go into it. You're going to love it. And leading on from that, I think maybe literally the biggest pro, the biggest advantage to building your own still, especially if you're a new distiller, is that it is going to force you to learn the hobby, to learn the craft, to learn the mechanics, to learn the safety aspects, to learn all these different things about distilling before you distill your first drop. You're going to have to know a lot of that stuff to be able to build a still that is going to give you the results you want later on. And that's a good thing. That gives you a really, really solid foundation to the hobby. But what about the downside to building your own still? What about the cons? Well, to be honest, they're kind of literally all the exact same points in a lot of ways. Once again, depending on the way you think about it, depending on what's important to you, depending on how you value time versus money, depending on how you value having extra materials and tools around the shed. For example, if you're one of the people out there that is unlucky enough to live in a place where you just can't get secondhand copper or secondhand stainless steel in the form factor you want, especially if new copper and new stainless steel is insanely expensive where you live. And yes, people, yes, there are places that legitimately are like this in the world. Like I said, you need to have an open mind and understand that different people's situations are different than yours. If you're in that situation, it might legitimately be cheaper for you to buy a still and get it imported to your area that would end up giving you a very comparable still type than you would be able to build for the same price. And that rolls on to the next point, the customizability. Really, at the end of the day, we're talking about how much money you spend for how much still you get. And once again, it's going to depend on all of the above. Perhaps you're the sort of person that just doesn't trust yourself to physically make things and learn those sorts of skills. And I would like to challenge you on that thinking a little bit because, I mean, I made this and I am by no means some amazing handyman. I'm used to using standard DIY tools, I guess, but this was way outside of my wheelhouse and I managed to do it. I do want to create some more content around making stuff like this, guys. So yeah, I will get to that. And I understand that the videos I have up now are very old and very cringy when it comes to making products. And I really think if I can do it, then you can do it as well. What about buying a still though? What are the pros here? Well, I think for me, the biggest one, the one that stands out the most, is the idea that it is just, it's a fast way into the hobby. It's no messing around. It's no gathering up secondhand materials and tools and skills and researching things and going to start and realizing that you bought the wrong flux and having to stop and start again and so on. And you get the idea, guys. Obviously, that's not going to be the same sort of process for everyone. Some of you guys are literally welders or plumbers and you've got everything you could possibly need in your shed. I'm not talking to you right now, let's be honest. But think of someone who's living in a small apartment somewhere that just wants to get into the hobby and make a few small batches of gin to suit their tastes, for example. You can buy a still like this, or even heck, something like this, that you can literally put in your pots and pans cupboard and have it to you in a pretty short amount of time. That is a huge pro. I get it, guys. I get there's a bunch of you cringing at this, but that's just true. There's no way around that. The second thing is that depending on your budget and the amount of money you want to spend versus your skill set in building, it can be a much more polished solution. I'm not necessarily talking about, these smaller stills like this. I'm sort of more talking if you wanted to just spend a couple of grand on a complete 8-plate still, for example. It's just going to roll up. You're going to have to do a little bit of work with the electronics and so on and so forth. But for the most part, you're just going to be able to plug and play. Once again, depending on your personality and the sort of person you are and the reason you're getting into the hobby, the amount of time you have, what you find enjoyable, what you find fun, all of those sort of things, that is a legitimate reason to just buy a still. In fact, I just talked to a guy recently, shout out dude, I won't use your name in case you don't want that mentioned, but he's a miner, and I think you can imagine how many hours he's working a week. He just kind of wants to get into it. He just wants to get stuck into the hobby. And with the amount of hours he's got left in a week, it might take him 2 years to get a still built. That's just kind of the way it is for some people. And there's one last thing that I want to mention here on the pro side of buying a still, which is kind of a pro, it's kind of not a pro, but I think it's something that just needs to be acknowledged. It satisfies that shiny new gear itch a little bit more than building, in my opinion. Some people out there like me just enjoy the equipment a little bit as well, just sort of researching and buying and waiting for and unboxing and setting up and getting used to and learning something that you've bought is kind of almost a hobby in and of itself. And I'm definitely someone that falls into that category. If you are too, I get you, I feel you. Just, I guess, be honest with yourself about how much that's weighing into the equation and how much you really care about scratching that itch and how much of a long-term satisfaction it's going to give you versus what you could do if you built a still. Does that make sense? Let's just put it out there. Mention it. And move on. So the downsides of buying a still. And the first thing I think we should mention is that it is very much budget dependent. Depending on the amount of money that you're happy to spend is going to depend on whether or not it is just worth considering this at all. For example, if you've got $200 to spend on a still and you would like to be making a decent amount of whiskey to be putting into barrels, I'm sorry, but you're probably not going to find a solution. Are you going to be able to build a still for $200? Today, no. But if you're patient and you're willing to scrounge up parts and you're lucky that there are parts to scrounge up in the area that you live, then yeah, you probably can. On the other hand, if you've got a couple of grand burning a hole in your pocket, then it's not a big issue. And obviously you're going to find a gradient of worthwhileness in between the two. Buying is also very location dependent, just purely based on what you can physically get, how you can get it there. So, whether or not there's a local distributor of the sort of products that you're looking for. If there's not, what is shipping like to your country? Perhaps it's astronomically expensive, like here in New Zealand. Barrels, for example. People keep giving me recommendations on places where I could look at barrels. There's these awesome barrels for $75. That's cool, dude, but it's going to cost me $250 to ship it to New Zealand. You get the point, right? And because of that, and because of the budget, and because of legalities around the world, should we say, your choice in different options has traditionally been pretty bad. Now, I will say this is changing fast. The world is shrinking fast. There are more people willing to manufacture this sort of stuff. There are more people that are actually listening to the community and what the community wants on a hobby level and producing products for those sorts of people. It is getting better, but really that's going to depend on where you live and your access to that market. There is one final con to buying a still. And for me, in New Zealand, doesn't matter at all. 100% legal here in New Zealand. I can shout from the rooftops that I'm distilling alcohol in my shed, and I'm not going to get in trouble for it. Privacy, for some of you guys, is a thing to consider. And I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to even try and explain how it works in different places. Just know, people might be watching who's buying what. All I'm going to say. All right, team. So, did I successfully sound like Yoda? Have I successfully told you absolutely nothing? Have I successfully told you to basically fuck off and make your own mind up? I think I kind of have, haven't I? But at the end of the day, I sort of feel like it just is one of those personal decisions. I don't feel confident saying one way or the other, this is what you should do. For a majority of people that have the ability to and the time to, I would suggest building a still. Purely because the one thing that I don't think is negotiable one side or the other is you're going to learn more about distilling by building a still than you will by buying a still. In some ways, guys, I think there's kind of a happy medium that can be had here. For example, I didn't really build that still from scratch. I had the pot, the boiler, donated very kindly to the channel, and I built everything that went on top of it. So there is definitely a world where you can buy certain parts of the still that are going to be tricky for you to manufacture. Perhaps you buy, for example, a liquid management head and you build everything else. Or you buy a pot, a boiler, and build everything else. Whatever you're going to do though, guys, whether you're buying, whether you're building, I would encourage you to at least consider how you can upgrade it later on. Is it modular? Is it built in a way that will allow you to grow with the still if you decide to without having to start from scratch? I should also mention one other thing that weighs both as a pro and a con for both once again. But before I do, I need to say a huge thank you. Let me get out of the way without standing on things. to the Patreons. Thank you so much, guys. I literally get to do this stuff because of you, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you, guys. The last thing that I want to mention is that there is just a certain satisfaction to using something that you've built. I love using that CCVM still over there because I built it. It makes me happy to use it. It gives me more satisfaction to use it. That is a pro because it makes me feel good. It's kind of a con because in some ways you almost get like the IKEA effect. People overvalue stuff that they've put more effort into. I think there is a little bit of that going around as well. You know, people playing up how much better a homemade still is than anything you can buy. I don't necessarily believe that in all cases. In some cases, sure. But yeah, I just wanted to flag that as well as a con, just to sort of say that sometimes you need to be aware of our own cognizant biases based on the fact that we are human. Anyway, guys, put your comments in the comment section down below. Let us know what you did to get your first still up and running and whether or not you regret your decision, whether you should have done the opposite. Did you build? Did you buy? What should you have done instead? In any case, guys, keep on chasing the craft, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.